If you walk across the green at First Hill, and instead of heading off into the bushes where we did on the last video, just go across and go through a fairly muddy bit, walk through, and there's a gravel track, and this track goes all the way up to Durridge, which is spelt Dorridge, but people locally say Durridge as though it was a U. There's a little ford here, and if you walk on up, you soon get a feel of how productive and what a fairly special place this little lower part of Dorridge is. This is the bit that my father always called Knobble, as in knobbly, because it is a bit lumpy, and it's not really a hill, it's just a little knobble. I know there's a bit of a tradition of calling small hills something or other, calling it a knob, which usually causes a few giggles when you've got a hill or a knob named after a particular person. This little bit of hill, which we call Knobble, is notable for its productivity. You've only got to look at the trees around here and you can see there's all manner of fruiting trees. There's hawthorn, you can see the haws, these lovely red fruits, and there are rose hips, but most notable of all, particularly this year, are the crab apples. Just look at this tree here. Absolutely loaded with beautiful little crabs. Very bright, all the sunshine has coloured them up well. Look at them. There are all these little squeeze-throughs where the animals just about get through. And they spend a lot of time here in the autumn because there's so much fruit to eat. More crab apples, lots more hawthorn berries. Another little clearing. And the reason for this productivity on Knobble is the fact that the soil here is better than most of the surrounding hillsides. This is proper soil. Sandy but decent soil. On the other hills, a lot of it is gravel, where you get the heather growing. But here there's bracken, these lovely trees, quite a good selection of different plants. You get harebells, and there's also this dwarf gorse, which is flowering at this time of year. There we go, that's the dwarf gorse. Adjacent to the properties on Knobble, there are more trees, normal sort of trees like oaks. There's some hazel, ash, some big holly trees. And just looking back down here, you can just about see, we go through, parallel to the fence on my right, there used to be a track that you could drive up, but since the forest was closed up more and access more restricted, this track's not being used, and hence the trees have pretty much taken it away. You'd be hard pressed to drive up here now in a car. Here's some of the properties alongside. Some pretty fine oak trees along this boundary. There's a little bunch of horses there shading on this sunny morning. There's quite a lot of old holly trees here, and typically on the forest most holly trees have been barked in the winter by deer or ponies, and you get some amazing shapes when the bark regrows and heals up. You get these strange patterns. You see some places where the bark's been removed right back to the wood, and you get an area where the bark very, very slowly regrows, like that. And all of the hollies along here have been nibbled and chewed in the same way, so you get these very, very characterful trunks with all kinds of fissures and gnarliness. And if you look closely, quite often you can see strange faces. Look at this warty chap here. So carrying on along this path alongside the properties, we can head up the eastern side of Knobble, away from the open forest. Very pleasant little walk, and if it's bright and sunny and hot, you get some lovely shade here. It's very pleasant. You can see it here, a typical bit of forest activity going on. We have a fence here, and then a ditch, and then a bank. Now this fence doesn't belong here at all. It shouldn't be here. The fence should be on the bank, because that's where the boundary is. And although the ditch belongs to the property owner, the fence should be on the property side and not here. So this is what we call snaffling in the forest. So this is leading to a bit of snaffled land, where people are trying to make their property bigger and basically stealing a bit of land from the forest. Not uncommon. You can see here it's quite wide. The fence is probably about at least 8 feet from where it should be. I mean, you can see that the bank is the old property boundary because it's got the big trees on it. If you look at this old oak here, you can see the nearly horizontal branching there. Get the light better on it. Now that will be a branch that was once laid as part of a laid hedge, and the practice of relaying hedges every 15 years or whatever has largely been abandoned here, and so the trees have grown up, and you've got something here which could be 100 years old, maybe not quite that, but a trunk has grown up from the laid part of the hedge, and so you've got quite a big tree which is part of what once was a laid hedge. And that pretty much, confirms that this bank in front of us was the boundary, and this bit of fence here is an attempt to snaffle some land. If you look further down, probably can't see it because of it's not zoomed in enough, but further down the fence is on the bank where it should be. Here we are, coming up to another property on this eastern boundary of Knobble, and one of my favourite trees around here is this old oak. Look at him. He is an absolute beast. Strangely, he has a gate in front of him. I'm not quite sure how that comes about. Clearly, you could never have got a tractor or a horse and cart through there, because that tree's been there for many, many decades, centuries. It's a huge tree. Absolutely beautiful. And I think if you were to measure the girth at breast height, which is the approved way to measure a tree, you'd find it's probably as big as most of the biggest oaks in the forest. It's a really good size. Carrying along this eastern boundary, we go through an area of hazel, birch, a few old oaks, but in front of us is the gravel track that goes up to Dorridge. And if we head across here, we can go out onto a more open part of Knobble, where there are still a lot of crab apples and hawthorns, a bit more open, more bracken. Hopefully we'll see some more of the crab apples. So going across the track, Now heading west. Out onto the open part of Knobble. Hard to find the tracks at this time of year because the bracken is so tall. And deer are quite slim. They manage to push through little gaps. And I'm not slim. I'm nothing like a deer. There's some nice jays, you can probably hear them. They're probably feeding on berries. And they do love acorns. And the acorns get carried around by the jays. Because the jays, they can carry a good many acorns in their, I suppose it's like a throat pouch, they carry them. And they'll take them off and bury them in fields with the intention of going back and getting them in the winter. But of course they forget some. And those that they forget grow into oak trees. And I'm sure the jays think that's a pretty good arrangement, really, because that means their future is assured because of a good crop of acorns coming along on all the new oak trees. Here we're coming through to another crabapple. This one's got some lovely fruits, but you can see the browse line. If you look, you can see the browse line's probably about 6 foot high. I can walk under the tree quite comfortably. Yeah, about 6 foot, just maybe a little bit less. And that's because the deer reach up and they browse the trees. And the fallow bucks will even get up on their hind legs and use their antlers to knock apples off the tree and also to reach lower branches. So the browse line here is really quite high. But not on everything, not on the thorns, because, you know, the clue is in the name. The hawthorns are very prickly, and so they don't get interfered with quite as much. So the browse line is most noticeable on particularly the crab apples. Partly because the crab apples offer so much food at this time of year. Other interesting thing is under the crab apples, and you can see quite clearly here, right, going out to the edge of the canopy, there's no bracken, just nice grass. And I think partly that's the lack of light under the tree, so it's not ideal for bracken, but also at this time of year, just look at all the crab apples on the ground. If you can see them through the dappled light, come out here. So all those, that's all crab apples. And the deer will enjoy them, as will the pigs and the cattle. And while they're under the trees eating, they're treading the ground, and they poop out a lot of manure, which enriches the soil, and the trampling suppresses the bracken, and so you get grass, which the stock are quite grateful for. You know, it's much more palatable than bracken, and so not only do they get the apples, but they get some nice tasty grass in the spring, and also again in the autumn. Now we've had rain, there's some decent grass for them. So as we come out onto the more western side of Knobble, you get the view across to Broggenslade, which is the valley in front of us here. The hill in front of you there, above the valley, is Castle Hill. Never had a castle on it, like so many castle hills. It just means that it was something of a viewing point in olden days. And I think probably it was defensive, but maybe going back to maybe even sort of Neolithic times. We fancy there's a bit of a causeway across the bog, roughly where I'm pointing now. So a drier place that you can walk up the face of Castle Hill there, which would have been a good defensive position, even in the days when the only defence you had was rocks and spears. You know, you'd be in a good position to defend that area against you know, another tribe who quite like the territory. You could just throw things down at them. But there we have, say, that's Broggenslade ahead of you. It's a glorious day today. We had a heavy rain shower an hour or two ago. The air is very clear. Lots of lovely clouds. Really nice day for a little walk. Hopefully you can see coming up yet another crabapple tree. A very widely spreading one, again with the very distinctive browse layer. You can see heavy crop of crabapples. There's a bit of a path to this tree. We're on it now. The bracken's been flattened, and I suspect the deer and the cattle have been making way to this tree because the apples look particularly nice. I should think it's a favoured tree. It's got a lot less on the ground. I think they've been hoovered up by the livestock. Just have a quick look at the apples. There they are. They're quite small, but not as small as the ones on the previous tree. A bit more worth the effort, and they've probably got more sugar and a bit more flavour. And again, you can see the grassy zone going out to the edge of the extent of the canopy of the tree. Just take a look through. There's a hawthorn with a lot of berries on it, and then we look out into Brongslade and the bog. Just a few thoughts about how Knobble used to be, going back maybe 100 years or more. And there are lots of signs that this once was wooded. A lot of honeysuckle, there are bluebells, wood sage, there are even some wild daffodils, which you won't see any sign of now, but in the spring they're very evident. And also that the fact that this soil is better than most of the soil around here, so it would very likely have been wooded maybe 100 or so years ago. But in my early days, so perhaps let's say 60 years ago, when I can remember, Knobble was actually had less trees than it does now, but that was probably down to grazing and clearing and burning. I'm sure prior to that, if you go back even further, there wouldn't have been so much burning, because the lord of the manor wouldn't have been too happy about a lot of burning going on. There were rules against it. So you can imagine this would have been probably mainly oak wood, maybe with some ash. And those oak trees probably got cut down maybe in one or other of the wars, maybe the Boer War or the First World War. People probably cut the trees, probably illicitly, but they were probably desperate for fuel. So the trees got cut, and then gradually the crabapples, the thorns, birch are coming back, and a few young oaks now are getting established. So I'm sure in time, if it's allowed, it will go back to oak wood, and that would be lovely, and that would shade out all this bracken, because the bracken is rather dominant. You can see some of the bracken is very high. We're just going to look at some of this bracken here, which is, I would say, probably more than 7 foot high. Look here, partly because it's supported by the bush, but yeah, it's a good 7 feet high, that bracken there, look. And the bracken's so vigorous here because the soil is good. Going back, I suppose, about 70 years or a bit more, my dad used to dig what they call top spit, which means the first spade depth of soil. And he used to get paid by the gardener over at the big manor house, because the top spit soil was good, it was fertile, and they used it to improve the garden. So you won't see it at this time of year, but over by the gravel track you can actually see where top spit was excavated for his lordship, for the benefit of his garden. And my dad got a few pennies for it, I'm sure. So we'll finish just by taking you down to the gutter, which we've seen in the previous video. So here's the gutter and a little bit of a pond here. I can see a couple of small dragonflies. You won't quite see them, but they were paired, 2 dragonflies paired, laying eggs. They're actually right in front now. I think they're common darters, probably, if you can see them. There they go. And that's the end of this video. Thank you for listening.